Sir, my son once had a birthmark exactly like yours. A seemingly harmless remark from a cleaning lady set billionaire Nathan Cross on a journey to uncover a devastating truth, that he wasn't truly a Cross by blood, that his real mother was still alive, and that she had once been forced to choose between love and poverty. This is a story of DNA, of tears, of moments that seemed beyond forgiveness, and yet forgiveness was chosen. If you believe that family is more than just blood, that it's about finding your way back, then like this video, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that touch the heart. That afternoon, the 41st floor of Cross Tower shimmered like gold, bathed in sunlight reflecting off the glass. It was a monumental day. The billion-dollar merger between Cross Holdings and a global tech investment chain was nearing its final act. The media waited. The financial world held its breath. At the eye of the storm stood Nathan Cross, dubbed the Iron Soul of Wall Street, stepping out of his private elevator. His suit was impeccable, the cuffs of his white shirt casually rolled, just enough, as he always did. He had no idea that this very moment would shatter everything he thought he knew about himself. Just a few steps away, the old cleaning lady, a woman few knew by name, who routinely tidied the boardroom every Tuesday afternoon, was hunched over wiping the marble conference table. But then her gaze froze. She couldn't look away from the faint crescent-shaped mark on Nathan's right wrist. She dropped her cloth. Her hands trembled. Her eyes blurred with tears. There was no mistake. She couldn't mistake that mark. As Nathan walked past her, she summoned every ounce of courage and spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. A voice that seemed to echo from another lifetime. Sir, my son once had a birthmark exactly like yours. The air thickened. Though soft, her words rang in Nathan's mind like a bell, striking some long, empty hollow inside him. He froze, looked at her. A frail woman, hair silver and disheveled, her face smudged with dust, but her eyes were something else. Not pleading, not desperate, just a deep sadness and a quiet certainty that made his heart skip a beat. What did you say? Nathan's voice was cold, but the confusion in his eyes betrayed him. She lowered her head, flustered. Then, from the pocket of her worn uniform, she pulled out an old, faded photograph, its corners frayed, sealed in cracked plastic. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause any trouble, but if you'd allow me, please just take a quick look. Nathan took it, unsure why. A boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old, wide, innocent eyes, dimples, a soft curl to his hair. But what sent a chill down Nathan's spine was the birthmark. A crescent in the exact same spot on the boy's right wrist, just like his. He looked up, lips pressed tight. The cleaning lady said nothing more. She just stood there, like a shadow that had waited decades. Outside the glass doors, the vice president was waving, signaling Nathan to come sign the deal. But he didn't move. A billion-dollar merger waited. Yet right here, a birthmark whispered of a forgotten identity. Nathan hurried down the side hallway of the boardroom, still clutching the worn photograph. He didn't know why he stopped. Why he didn't just dismiss the words of a stranger. But the photo and the birthmark, they felt like two puzzle pieces quietly calling out to each other. Behind him, the cleaning lady followed at a distance, her eyes carrying the careful hesitation of someone long used to being invisible. The break room at the end of the hall was empty, bathed in the soft yellow of overhead lights reflecting off the cold floor. Nathan turned around. What's your name? Agnes Hale, she replied softly, hands clasped in front of her. And the child in the photo? Nathan asked, his voice lower now. His name was Daniel Hale, my son. From her purse, she pulled out an old envelope. Inside were a few newspaper clippings, yellowed with age. One headline read in bold, 3-year-old boy mysteriously vanishes from Eastside housing complex. Below was a photo of a young woman holding a toddler, the same boy from the photo. Daniel. And the woman, a much younger Agnes, nearly 40 years ago. Her eyes round and filled with hope. That hope had wrinkled over time, but it had never gone out. He disappeared in 1983. Just days after his 3rd birthday, she said. I had just started my night shift at the sewing factory. When I came home, the door to our room was wide open. He was gone, like he never existed. She looked up, trying to smile, but her eyes shimmered. The police said maybe he wandered off, told me I should move on. But I knew my son didn't leave on his own. He was just a baby. Do you believe me, Mr. Cross? Nathan didn't answer right away. He looked at the photo, then down at his own wrist, the birthmark still there, quietly unchanged. "You think I'm Daniel?" "I'm not certain," she said gently. "But when I saw that mark, something inside me just clenched. All these years, I've kept searching. I don't expect anything, only a chance. If you could, maybe run a test or speak to your parents." Nathan looked up. Agnes couldn't have known, but in that moment, something inside him cracked. A faint fracture in memory, like something long hidden was beginning to stir. And what kept him from walking away, what made it impossible to dismiss her trembling voice, wasn't the idea that she might be his mother. It was something else. It was the way she looked at him, that strange, aching familiarity in her eyes. A feeling he couldn't name, but couldn't deny. "Let me keep the photo," he said quietly. "I'll look into it." Agnes nodded. She didn't say thank you. She didn't cry. She just stood there, still and silent, like someone who had waited too long to risk hoping too much. That night, for the first time in years, Nathan couldn't sleep. He lay awake in his sprawling penthouse, the city lights casting faint reflections through the glass onto his face, a face now clouded with confusion. On the table, the old photograph sat neatly beside a glass of whiskey. He had looked at it no less than 10 times and still couldn't understand why the eyes of that little boy looked so much like his own. His childhood. Something he'd always thought of as clear and orderly, now felt like a film missing its opening reel. He remembered growing up in the Cross family, getting the best education, being taught how to speak with authority, how to dominate in every negotiation. But he couldn't remember when his parents had adopted him. He only remembered one day he had his own room, a maid, and a stern nanny in a buttoned-up white dress who always called him "my good boy." He had never questioned it. Until today. Nathan got up and walked over to his personal safe, where he kept his most important documents. He pulled out the adoption file his adoptive mother had given him when he turned 18, after he demanded to know where he came from. It simply read, "Nathaniel J. Cross, adopted from St. Mary's Orphanage, 1985. No birth parents, no original birth certificate. He had once asked his adoptive mother, and she had answered softly, 'We couldn't have children. But when I saw you in that file, I knew you were meant to be mine.' Back then, he believed her. But now, Nathan opened his laptop and searched for records from St. Mary's Orphanage, a small center on the outskirts of the city, now defunct. He called his assistant and instructed her to track down all archived records from 1983 to 1985 and send them over that night. Images began stirring in his mind. Faint, dreamlike, like fragments of an old memory torn in half. A low-ceilinged wooden room, the smell of baked goods rising from a stovetop oven, a soft voice humming him to sleep, and a blurry face of a young woman with eyes strikingly like Agnes's. His chest tightened. Suddenly, his lifelong loneliness had a shape, a texture, something he could almost name. Nathan stood silently by the window. Outside, a light rain had begun to fall. Part of him wanted to dismiss it all. Chalk it up to the delusions of an elderly woman clinging to hope. But deep inside, something had cracked, like a sheet of ice touched by the first warmth of spring. Daniel Hale, he whispered the name for the first time. It didn't feel entirely foreign, but it didn't feel quite like someone else either. And he knew then there would be no going back. The next morning, Nathan sat alone in his office. His phone was powered off, the board meeting postponed. There was no room in his mind for stock charts or growth metrics. Only 3 words remained. Daniel Hale, 1983. His personal assistant, Lucas, entered carrying a thick, bound folder. "Sir, I contacted the city archives and dug through old newspapers. This is everything I could gather on the Daniel Hale case." Nathan flipped quickly through the pages. One article from the Herald Tribune stood out. Bold headline screaming, 3-year-old vanishes from tenement, entire neighborhood joins desperate search. Below the headline was the same photo he'd seen in Agnes's hands, the young mother holding her child close, eyes wide and burning with fierce determination. For the first time, he read the story in full. Daniel Hale, born in 1980, disappeared on the night of July 14, 1983. His mother, Agnes Hale, was a garment factory worker. Daniel was last seen asleep on the small bed he shared with his mother in their temporary housing unit on the city's east side. Police found no signs of forced entry, but the front door had been left open. No solid leads, except for one neighbor's account. I heard a child crying in the night, but figured it was next door. Nathan read each word carefully. A chill crept up his spine. Date of disappearance, July 14th, 1983. Date Nathan first appeared in Cross Holdings records, August 1983. The gap was just 3 weeks. He turned to the next page, a copy of the missing child bulletin issued by the police. The description listed height, weight, hair color, and then one detail made his grip tighten. Identifying mark, faint crescent-shaped birthmark on the right wrist. Nathan's heart pounded. That was it. The same birthmark, the one he used to hate as a child when classmates teased him, the one he'd once considered removing with laser treatment. Now it was suddenly the key to unlocking his entire life. No way, Nathan whispered. But deep down, he knew. This coincidence was too precise to be random. He picked up the photo of Daniel and placed it beside an old childhood photo of himself from the Cross Holdings archive. The eyes, the shape of the chin, even the slightly tilted pose in the photo, all the same. Lucas glanced at his boss, concerned. Do you think maybe it's time for a DNA test? Nathan didn't respond right away. He just stared out the window, where early morning light was beginning to slip between the city's tall buildings. No, he said quietly. Not yet. Before the test, I want to know who brought me to the orphanage. That was the first place he needed to go. St. Mary's Orphanage was over an hour's drive from the city center. Now it had become a small nursing home, tucked quietly among windswept oaks in the sleepy suburbs. Nathan stepped out of the car. No bodyguards, no entourage, carrying only a small leather bag, and a heart pounding out of rhythm. He had never returned here. In his memory, St. Mary's was just long, cold hallways, the scent of disinfectant, and names he never spoke with affection. Now walking in, he felt like a stranger, or worse, a thief, sneaking into his own life. The nursing home manager led him down a quiet corridor to a small room at the end. There, sitting on a fabric-covered chair, was an elderly man, white-haired, slender, but with eyes still sharp and clear. A silver name tag on his chest read, Arthur Raines. You worked at St. Mary's during the 1980s and 90s? Nathan asked. Arthur looked up, staring at Nathan for several seconds, as if adjusting a blurry memory into focus. You're Nathan Cross? Nathan froze. You know me? Not as Nathan, Arthur said, slowly. But I used to call you Danny, or more properly, Daniel. You were the kid who cried the most I'd ever seen. The air thickened. Everything stopped. Arthur motioned for him to sit, and for a brief moment, the dust of the past began to fall away. You came to St. Mary's in the summer of 1983. No records before that. They said you'd been abandoned, but there was no birth certificate, no names of parents. Just a thin blanket stitched with the initials DH, and a small fabric backpack with a few cheap plastic toys inside. Nathan swallowed hard. Do you remember anything else? Who brought me here? Arthur shook his head slowly. Not exactly. You were dropped off at the gate with a man in a suit. He claimed to be a distant relative, said he couldn't take care of you anymore. Signed some forged paperwork. I was young back then, thought anyone willing to take in a child must mean well. What stood out was, he used a check, said it was to ensure the legal process went smoothly. Do you still have his name? Nathan asked, his voice tight. Arthur let out a long sigh, walked over to an old filing cabinet, and pulled out a yellowed folder. He flipped open a page. Here, a copy of the receipt. The name signed is R. Cross. Nathan froze. His adoptive father. So it wasn't fate, as Mrs. Cross had always said. He hadn't just happened to be found at the orphanage. It was all orchestrated. Nathan stood, eyes burning red. Thank you. I owe you for this. Arthur gave a slow nod. If you really are Daniel, your mother searched for years. She came here once, brought an old photo, but by then, the records were sealed. Nathan walked outside, heart heavy. The wind had begun to pick up, and he knew the biggest storm was waiting at home. The Cross estate sat atop the northern hills of the city, where the air was always crisp, and every gate had its own private guard. Nathan drove alone. No calls, no warning. He wasn't willing to wait any longer. Mrs. Cross, the woman he had called mother his entire life, was seated in the back garden, sipping tea amidst a field of soft purple lavender. When she saw Nathan approach, she smiled gently, but the smile quickly faded when she caught the look on his face. You're home early, Nathan. I thought you had meetings in San Francisco today? Nathan didn't waste time. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the old photo of Daniel, and placed it quietly on the tea table. I met someone yesterday. She said she's my birth mother. The air turned to stone. Mrs. Cross looked at the photo, her lips pressed into a thin line. Who gave you this? Her name is Agnes Hale. I went to St. Mary's Orphanage. The name on the adoption file. The man who signed for me was Richard Cross. Mrs. Cross looked up at him again. In her eyes, something flickered, not surprise, but defense. Nathan, listen to me, she said calmly. This world is full of people who prey on emotion. That woman could have planned this for years. It's probably an elaborate scam. Nathan stared at her unblinking. You're saying she invented an entire past just to trick me? You're the heir to an empire, she said firmly. Everyone wants a piece of it. You must understand that. Nathan took a deep breath. Her answer didn't make him angry. It just made him sad. What about father? Can I speak to him? Mrs. Cross shook her head. He's not seeing anyone. The doctors say his heart is weak. Nathan stepped forward and placed a thick envelope on the table. I'm not here to demand anything, but if you truly believe that woman is a liar, then take this money, hire someone, investigate her. If you're right, I'll never bring it up again. Cross didn't touch the envelope. You're letting emotion cloud your judgment. You are a Cross. Don't forget that. Nathan lowered his gaze. The problem is, I'm not sure I ever was. He turned and walked away, leaving behind the quiet garden that had once been the safest place of his childhood. Behind him, Mrs. Cross remained seated, silent. Her eyes, the ones he had once believed held only love, were now colder than winter itself. The second-floor room of the Cross estate was always kept warm, the curtains drawn tight. Richard Cross lay on the large bed, his body frail, a heart monitor blinking slowly beside him. His eyes were half closed, as if he could slip away from the world at any moment. Nathan stood silently, looking at the man he had once revered, the man he had called father with deep respect. The private nurse moved to stop him, but Nathan raised a hand. Just 5 minutes. I'll take full responsibility. She hesitated, then nodded and stepped out, leaving the room steeped in stillness. Nathan pulled a chair beside the bed. It's me, Nathan? Or maybe I should say Daniel? Richard's eyes opened slowly, and for a moment he didn't look old or weak. He looked straight at Nathan, then closed his eyes again, as if exhaling with his entire soul. You know. The confession was soft as air, but it roared inside Nathan's chest. Why? He asked, voice trembling. Why me? Do you know I've lived my whole life inside a broken mirror? No real name, no real memories, nothing. Richard kept his eyes closed for a long moment. Then he spoke, each word slow, as if pulling it from the shadows of the past. That year, our company was on the edge of collapse. A man, someone with power, with money, someone I owed a great debt, he brought you to me. He said the child had been abandoned. No one would claim him. The police were exhausted. The case was all but closed. If I adopted you, he'd erase my debt to the bank. Nathan's hands clenched tightly. And you agreed? Richard's eyes opened, his lips trembling. Your mother, your adoptive mother, she didn't know. I hid it from her. She believed you were a gift from fate. But me, I sold my soul for money. Was I ever anything to you? Nathan asked, his voice hoarse. There was a long silence. Then Richard turned his head slowly toward him. Yes. Later, when I saw you walk, speak, when you called me Dad, I wanted to forget everything before that. But the truth never sleeps, Nathan. He coughed softly, the hollows in his cheeks deepening. A single tear slid from the corner of his eye and soaked silently into the pillow. Find your real mother, if you still can. She's the only one who never sold you. Nathan said nothing more. He stood, then gently squeezed Richard's hand, one final time, and in his father's fading eyes, for the first time, there was no power, only remorse. As Nathan stepped out of the room, the evening sun had vanished. One era had ended, and a new journey, to reclaim himself, had just begun. The DNA results lay silently on the table. Under the soft yellow light, the bold printed words pounded against Nathan's chest. Analysis result, 99.98% match. Relationship, mother-child. He gripped the edge of the paper as if the weight of his entire past had collapsed into this single moment. Across from him, Agnes trembled, her tears falling freely. No sobs, no sound, just one drop after another, as if she had held them back for 40 years, waiting for this. Nathan said nothing. He reached out, gently touching her shoulder. "Mom?" he whispered. Just one word. But to Agnes, it carried the weight of a lifetime reclaimed. She broke down like a child, pressing her palms to her son's face, hands shaking with fear that he might vanish, like the dream she had lost 100 times in her sleep. Nathan sat quietly beside her, letting her clutch his hand. But something still pressed on his heart, a question, unanswered. When she had calmed, he met her eyes and asked slowly, "I still don't understand. Why did I end up in an orphanage? If it was a kidnapping, how did I enter the legal system? And what did you do when I disappeared?" Agnes paused. Her eyes flickered, then looked away. Her voice dropped. I called the police. They searched for weeks. They said maybe you were taken for child trafficking." Nathan gave a small nod, but his eyes never left hers. "Did you ever think maybe they didn't take me to sell me, but to give me to someone? Did anyone ever approach you before I disappeared?" Agnes's hands tensed, then slowly released. Her face sank as if she had just heard the past knocking at her door. "There was a man. He came to see me a few times. He said he could help with Daniel. Said he could place you with a good family if I was truly too poor to raise you." Nathan held his breath. "And you agreed?" Agnes went still, then nodded, very slowly. "It was just something I said out of desperation. I didn't think he'd actually do it. I was going to say no, but the next morning you were gone." No one spoke for a long while. Outside the window, the wind gently stirred the white curtain. Finally, Nathan exhaled. "I don't blame you, but I need to know the truth, no matter how much it hurts." Agnes looked at him, her eyes red and brimming. "The truth is, I've lived my whole life hoping to hear you call me Mom, even just once. And now, if that was the only time I ever hear it, I can live with that." Nathan said nothing. He didn't make any promises, but he didn't let go of her hand either. And sometimes, that means more than forgiveness ever could. After that conversation, Nathan returned to his upscale apartment, where everything remained tidy and pristine, but inside, he felt like he had just walked barefoot through a battlefield. He wasn't angry at Agnes. He wasn't even sure if he had forgiven her. What he felt was unfamiliarity. 40 years living under a name that wasn't truly his. And now, upon discovering his origins, he found they might have started with a single slip from his birth mother. One desperate misstep. One moment of weakness that rewrote her child's entire fate. Nathan decided to search for proof. He rehired the investigator who had helped trace his orphanage records. They combed through all of Agnes's bank activity from 1983 and found it, an anonymous deposit made exactly 2 days after Daniel disappeared. The amount wasn't massive, but for a struggling seamstress like Agnes back then, it would have felt like a fortune. In addition, the investigator located a woman who had once lived in the same boarding house as Agnes. Her name was Judith, now in her 70s, residing in a small town on the city's outskirts. Nathan made the trip, hoping she held the final piece of the truth. Judith sat across from him in a modest room filled with old books and the scent of cinnamon. "You're Daniel?" she asked, eyes wide. "Oh my, I never thought I'd live to see the day I met that little boy again." "Do you know what happened to me?" Nathan asked. Judith nodded, then began. "I remember that night. A man came to Agnes's room. They argued. He told her he could give her boy a better life. Agnes cried, said she didn't want to be separated from her son. But she was so tired, so worn down. I think part of her wanted to believe he was genuinely kind. And then? The next morning, the door was open. The room was empty. Agnes was curled up like a shadow. She didn't speak. She didn't eat, didn't sleep for days. Nathan sat in silence for a long time. He realized Agnes hadn't sold him with cold calculation. She had lost him because she no longer had the strength to fight. She wasn't entirely innocent, but she wasn't heartless either. After that meeting, Nathan stood before a mirror. He looked at his reflection, the face of a man who had once been Daniel, had once been Nathan Cross, had once been the nameless child in a crowded orphanage. And he understood life doesn't divide itself cleanly into black and white like a business contract. Sometimes, the people who love us most are the ones who once hurt us the deepest. That afternoon, the sunlight draped over the city like a silk scarf resting gently on its shoulders. Nathan parked in front of a small house on the outskirts, a place with no glass walls, no fingerprint scanners, just bougainvillea climbing along the fence and a weathered wooden chair on the porch. Agnes was sitting there, knitting an unfinished scarf. She still knitted like always, even though no one reminded her anymore. Those hands, once trembling as they held his, now moved steadily, as if already accustomed to her son's weekend visits. Nathan approached, his steps slow, like someone who had learned to walk through memories without crushing them. He sat beside her in silence. The breeze played with his hair, carrying the familiar scent of ginger tea from the kitchen. "I still want to know why you chose silence," he said, after a while. Agnes paused her knitting, then looked at him, her gaze still and deep, like an old lake. "Because I thought, if I wasn't strong enough to keep you, I didn't deserve to ask for you back." Nathan said nothing. "I was afraid that if you ever found out, you'd hate me, and I'd rather carry the pain alone than see that look in your eyes." He gave a small nod. Sometimes a confession doesn't need forgiveness, only a place to be heard. "I can't forget what happened," he said softly, "but I don't want to carry it like a weight anymore. I think the one thing you never lost was your love." Agnes smiled, a quiet smile, as if her heart had finally opened one last time. That night, Nathan stayed until late. They had dinner together. She told him about the tiny baby shirt she had once hand-stitched during a freezing winter night. He told her about the first time a classmate called him the kid with no real parents, and how he didn't know what to say back. At the end of the night, he kissed her forehead and whispered, "I'm home." No judgment, no conditions, just a return, exactly as it was meant to be. Life doesn't always draw clean lines between right and wrong, between the good and the bad. Some wounds are invisible, but still change us forever. Some mistakes can't be undone, but they can be forgiven. Agnes had failed, had faltered, had let go out of exhaustion. But the love she held for her child, however flawed, however clumsy, had never stopped flowing. And Nathan, a man raised among power and doubt, finally understood. The roots of who we are aren't found in bloodlines, or titles, or names. They're found in what we choose when faced with the truth. Choosing forgiveness over resentment. Choosing to return rather than walk away. That's how people become family. Not because they're perfect, but because they accept each other as they are.